Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's episode of Financial Transformation Live. As usual, I'm your host, Hannah Munro, and welcome to today's episode. So, today, what are we covering? We are covering all about designing your finance data structures, and I'm going to explain a little bit about what those are in a second. So, let's get into it. So, today's session is going to cover the components of strong financial data design, common mistakes and risks, and advice, I guess, on how to avoid common mistakes and risks, how to ensure it's the right financial structure, something that's going to work not just now but in the future, and top tips for migration. And of course, as usual, any questions you may have about how to do this. So, both before and after the show. So, for those of you that are listening on this demand, don't think that your window of opportunity has closed. Please do reach out. I'm always happy to answer questions, and I will use them as inspiration for my next session or as a follow up session if need be. So, for those of you that haven't joined one of these sessions before, my name is Hannah Munro. I'm Managing Director and Transformation Lead here at ITAS. So my job and my role is to support our delivery teams to ensure that we are helping customers transform and achieve their objectives within their transformation projects. And we do this as an organization using Sage technology. So we're a financial transformation consultancy that specializes in Sage. We've won a number of awards, and even these sessions, Financial Transformation Live, has won its own awards. But fundamentally, we are here to help our customers drive change. And the reason we started this show was purely because a lot of these principles are applicable not just to Sage technology. So we wanted to share it with a wider audience, and of course, would love your feedback and ideas on areas that you need help or assistance with. So, for those of you that missed last month's session, we went into the process maturity scale. So, what that looks like, how you can assess your own process maturity as an organization, and almost setting the goals and the ambition for where we should be heading. That is now available on demand on the podcast if you want to listen to it, on YouTube if you want to see a lot of the content, because these transformation lives, I do generally try to prepare slides to support. So sometimes it's a bit better in this instance to watch it on a visual piece. And of course, you can access it on demand on LinkedIn as well. So what are the components of strong finance data design? So I kind of think of it in 4 stages. So gathering report requirements, understanding and assessing your existing systems capabilities, assessing your finance data design against your data entry processes, and thinking about the maintenance and ongoing upkeep of this data structure. So they're the 4 key areas that I think people should focus on. And very often when I go into organizations, so I'll assess what they're trying to achieve and help them. Basically, a lot of times I'm going in to help them get more out of their Sage technology. And when I do that, what I tend to find is somebody's built something in the data structure that doesn't work for the organization's current requirements. So sometimes that's a historical approach, but maybe they've not thought about each of these 4 elements when they've put together their system or data design. So I'm going to talk to you about how I think through and understand what is the right system design, the kind of the process I like to take people through, and very much, with this piece is that this is not at some points, and I'll point these out, you do need some advice from a technical consultant that knows your software, but it's applicable not just to Sage software, as I mentioned earlier, but it's also applicable to any software that you work with. And I do try to make these sessions as broadly effective as I possibly can. So let's start with what do we mean by finance data structure? So what I'm talking about are things like your chart of accounts, your supplier and customer account setup, the dimensions that you have either in your nominal or outside with things like project accounting, your stock and product structure. And a lot of people say, well, I don't do stock. I was like, well, you might still need a product or stock structure, because very often systems have the ability to create what we call service products. So they're not sort of tracking inventory, but what they can be used for is things like reporting. And very often they have the ability to add additional fields onto those stock items and allow you to pull profitability by product or service, right, which you might not be able to access depending on the depth within your nominal. So we use products or items or stock to give us another layer of reporting. Okay. So we have a chart of accounts. We'll think through supplier and customer accounts, and any other dimensions and projects that you might have. So when you're approaching any kind of redesign, and again, this is one of the areas where I find people don't spend enough time, is actually gathering what they need to achieve. So it's a bit like setting, grabbing a flight with actually not knowing what your destination is. The first thing is, do you know your destination, right? And the ultimate destination of any kind of data structure is reporting. And so we need to understand, so what's working well, because we mustn't lose capability when we redesign our finance data structure. So what's working well? What are some of the reports you can get out that you like and that are valuable? And then what's not? So where are the issues? And thinking through the pros and the cons and working across your stakeholder group is really important, because again, one of the big mistakes that I see within when people go through this process is they'll consult with stakeholders, but only a small subsection. So they'll just consult with, say, the board or the senior management without actually speaking to the different groups of users that sit around your finance system. Because you might have a warehouse manager if you are a stock based organization, you might have a warehouse manager, you might have a production manager. Um, you might have a credit control manager, an AP manager. So making sure that you're working across your organization to understand the great things, the good things that are working, and the challenges as you go through and sort of build out your requirements for reporting is really important. So the areas where we need to gather requirements for are operational reporting. So what I mean by operational is sort of the day-to-day elements of the organization. Maybe it's the numbers of orders placed or the numbers of invoices processed, for instance. So it's sort of the KPIs that sit across the business: average profitability, margin, those kind of things. So transactional reporting is working on things like, how do we analyze our transactions that are going through? So what are we, things like age debt, age credit, and those kinds of things that are going through the system. So invoices raised, etc. And then the third element of reporting is your strategic or management reporting. So that is understanding things like board packs or management packs. How do they want these displayed? What is the requirement? How do they want to slice and dice? And what level do they want to drill down to? Again, for each of these types of reporting, you should be pulling out, what are they currently doing? What would they like to do? And put together a series of use cases, because you need to be able to assess your new suggested structure to say, how is this going to work? Where is this going to come from? So putting together use cases is really, really vital to the success of this project. And again, it's one of the areas where most people go wrong. And because we need to make sure that we've got almost like the exam the assessment at the end, to make sure we're doing the right thing. So again, these use cases allow us to evaluate different data structure options, and make sure that we can meet the needs of the entire organization with our new financial data structures. Okay. And also, one question, okay, that I have been asked is, what should there be in a use case? For me, it's, you should have enough information to test whether something can deliver. So think about, how you want to display information, how they want to consume the information, what data needs to go into, what level do they need to be able to drill down to, how do they need to be able to filter and slice and dice that data, and that's your use case. And obviously, the more use cases you have, the more thorough your evaluation of your new data structure. But you might need to prioritize, because sometimes, whilst you can meet a lot of them, you can't meet all of them. And so you might have to make a choice as to which is more important. So a prioritization of your use cases is also valuable as well. Okay, so in order for us to deliver on that reporting requirement, we need to understand the capabilities of the existing software, particularly if you're not planning on changing it anytime soon. And again, very often what I find is that the system can actually do what the organization wants it to do, but perhaps the data hasn't been set up in a way that enables it to do so. So the sorts of questions you need to discover with your with your existing technology is, what layers and dimensions do you have in your chart of accounts? So what do I mean by that? Is that most of us know that we can obviously have different nominal accounts, and there'll be a substructure that sits within that. So how we number, what opportunities there are. But very rarely people think necessarily about layers. So sometimes some systems offer the ability to add in like an actual or an adjustment layer or a committed layer. So that's what I mean by a layer. And then you also have dimensions. Now, pretty much every financial system has some kind of dimension with varying capabilities. So, for instance, even the smaller systems have the concept of a department within their nominal. Yeah, so understanding what dimensions you have. So obviously, if you work with Sage, Sage 50 has departments, Sage 200 has cost centers and departments, and then Sage Intact obviously has the dimensions themselves. So, and of course, you can keep adding to those with user-defined dimensions. And how does your system build out financial statements out of the box? Again, this is an area where people don't always think it through. They think if they build the perfect chart of accounts or nominal structure that they'll be able to pull the profit and loss in the way they want. And in some instances, yes, 100% true, but in some instances, not. So sometimes there is a way of numbering the accounts that allows them to be grouped in a certain way. In 200, for instance, we have the concept of report categories where we can tag an account with a report category, and that determines the lowest level that we can analyze in a standard sort of P&L. And then, in Intact, we've got things like account groups. So you can build out multiple account group structures to support your reporting requirements. So that was a very stagey example, but that's the sorts of things that you need to ask or figure out from your existing software, regardless of whether it's Sage or not, is how does your system design financial statements? Because profit and loss and balance sheets are the hardest ones to do in things like Excel and Power BI, etc., without some kind of intervention or complex logic around subgroupings and subgroupings, etc. Having built a few in my day, or without any fancy lookups. So if you understand how out of the box your finance system builds P&Ls and balance sheets, you can design and work with the data structure around that as well. So the other thing is to think about what reporting tools do you have available and what reporting tools are available within your software. So what I often find is that people don't realize that their solution has multiple reporting tools, multiple ways of getting information out of the system. And this is pretty typical actually. And what you tend to find across most systems is that there is a report designer for things like financial reports, like profit and loss and P&Ls, because they need to be displayed in a certain way. They've got some complexities around how they do subtotals and how they group things. So they tend to have their own designer, and then you'll normally have like an operational transactional reporting tool that allows you to sort of access the wider data sets. So it's really important that you understand what reporting tools do you have available or could be made available to you in your finance software, and what data sources do they access? Are there any limitations in the data that they can access? Because again, that gives you some options for how you do that. And then what fields do you have available on different objects? So what I mean by this is that we talked about sort of the core, the core finance objects of customers, suppliers, etc. But very often you can build fields on those objects. So you can add an industry field to the customer. You could add a origin field to a stock item. You could add a type field to a project, for instance. And then depending on your system's reporting capabilities, and that's why we need to understand what it can, you might be able to use those as filters and or ways of grouping if your reporting tools within your system allow you to do so. So that's why it's really important to understand, what are the areas where you can customize the data structure within your system? And secondly, how, which reporting tools allow you to access and slice and dice that data? So, and I get this a lot. So I see it a lot when people first come to us looking at Sage Intact, particularly because it has a really great way of allowing you to build what we call dimension groups. So a dimension, for instance, could be a project. And then what you can do is you can add fields onto that project And because you're coding every transaction to a project, you can then pull a P&L by project or by a field that sits on the project. So that could be type. So whether it's, I don't know, consultancy or it could be an implementation project or it could be an ad hoc consultancy project, and you could group and pull P&Ls by those things. And what that does give you is a much more flexible way of working. So that's why it's really important to understand what capabilities does your current finance solution offer you in terms of the use of custom fields. So most of them have some basic capability. They might have a few preset fields that you can customize. So think about how you could use those, and then can you access that data in filters and list views and reports? So something to consider. And also, which is also important is, can you get the data out in different ways? Because if you're hitting a blank in that you cannot achieve the reporting that you want with the current set of data tools, well, can you pull it out into Excel using things like ODBC? Can you build custom SQL views and upload those? Or perhaps there's a data layer that could be laid on top of your finance system. And I've talked about this before with when I did a session on how to design your finance system strategy. So thinking about the different layers within your finance systems. But that again is very common when we see people that perhaps want more than the core system can provide, and then you can put a layer on like Power BI or a Tableau or or a Profix, one of those big sort of reporting systems. But as a starting point, it's really important to understand how you can get data out and how flexible that is. And if you have access to, say, SQL database that sits behind, and you have the ability to pull SQL queries, etc., then that gives you a huge amount of flexibility. And it also means that you can maybe push the data structures a bit further than what the standard reporting tools within the system allow. And last but definitely not least is, what validation tools do you have embedded within the organization to ensure data compliance and correctness? So what do I mean by this? I mean things like, can you automate the selection of a nominal code based on, say, a product, for instance? How do you set your defaults? How do you validate that the data's been populated? Can you set things as mandatory or optional or build drop downs? So what validation can you put in place to support your new reporting and data structure? Because it doesn't matter how great your data design is, if the data isn't complete or is incorrectly entered, then it's not going to do you any good. So one of the things that we really need to think about is, how do we validate the data options that we have? Okay, so lots of things to understand about your existing systems and software. And of course, if you need any questions about how Sage works, please do reach out. I'm happy to answer all of these questions for any of our existing Sage users. So then what you do is, once you've taken your reporting requirements and you've understood the system requirements, then you need to kind of design your data structure. Yeah, so using those two bits of information. And then we're on to testing it. So we need to figure out, is this data structure is it not only going to deliver the reporting requirements, but is it practical to use? Okay. So the stages I like to go through is in the following order. And I'll explain why as we go through it. So the first thing is just to theory test what you're thinking. So pull out your use cases, think about your data structure, and just run through, in theory, whether you can meet the use cases with your data structure. So just run them through. Say, can I, this use case, can I deliver it with this structure? So I always like to do a theoretical sense check against the original use cases, just to make sure I can deliver everything. And maybe there's a piece about, I think I can, but maybe this is the area I need to focus. You then, and this is really important, you then need to work through all of your data entry points and processes to ensure this will work. Because what can often happen is that the end structure works for reporting, but you can't get the data in the way that you normally do. So it might require some process change, and you want to know about that now, because you need to evaluate whether that's a change that you're willing to do and accept. So working through each of your data entry processes will allow you to understand whether this is actually a feasible option, and the level of change management that's required. And again, this is one of the steps that can sometimes get missed. So sometimes, for instance, I've had it before where somebody had built a massive chart of account design. But what they hadn't thought about is the fact that all of their defaults come from the products or the services that get selected on the invoice. So they had to then like triple or quadruple the number of products they had, and that wasn't practical for their sales and their order entry teams in this instance. So or it was a big piece of change management and education that was required. And when they thought about it, they went back to the drawing board and did things with a slightly different approach that allowed them to achieve the same objective. So there's normally a couple of different ways to achieve the same objective with reporting. So you just need to think about, am I going at it from the nominal? Am I going at it from the transaction? And what's the pros and cons of each approach? So top tip, work through your data entry processes and assess whether this is going to work for you, and understand any change management that you're going to need to manage as part of this shift. Then you need to think about, what if things change, right? How maintainable is this new data structure? And this is maintenance both from a historical reporting perspective, but also from a keeping your data up to date. So sorts of things that can become unmaintainable is if every time that you add a new customer, you have to edit a VLOOKUP of some sort, to achieve this report. That's not necessarily maintainable. It's open to risk. And especially if you get lots of new customers, which I hope you do, then that's a challenge. It could be also that what happens if something changes. So like an account, if you've built your report, you want to be able to report, say, by account manager and understand how profitable each account, how much money each account manager is making for you. If you do that based on the account manager on the customer, and you put the account manager as a field on the customer, if that account manager changes, the previous account manager, all that data is lost because the data is sitting on the customer, not coded directly into a nominal. So again, you need to think through what happened, where is data likely to change, and should the existing data follow, or should it be reallocated to that new field or that new tag? And then run your data structure past your technical consultant. So this is the key part, because you can go away and design, but your technical consultants should know common issues, right? So they'll be able to tell you things, obviously they're not going to be able to necessarily perfect it, because again, the best way to assess the validity of any kind of data structure is actually to run it through a testing process, which we'll talk about in a second. But they will be able to help you avoid investing a lot of time and effort if they look at it and go, yeah, this is where you're going to hit issues, or this is what you need to think about if you're going to go down that route. And that's what you want. You just want the advice to go, am I on the right track? Have I understood what my system can do? Is there a better way of doing this that is maybe more effective for this organization? So again, you want to get them to check any issues, any potential drawbacks, but also just to sense check that you're not going down a rabbit hole. And talking of going down rabbit holes, I've seen some whoppers of charts of counts in the past. And generally, if it's starting to feel overly complex and you're sitting here going, wow, this is a lot, or this feels like it's going to be really hard to maintain, trust your gut, because you're normally right. And don't build something that you wouldn't be happy to hand over to somebody that's new to maintain, because again, this is about building a future, a chart of accounts and other data structures that work for the organization as it grows. If this isn't scalable, don't do it. And in those instances, you may need to look at alternative reporting capabilities, whether that's reassessing your finance system, or looking at data, reporting layers to enhance what you can do, because that's normally where that when I see particularly ugly, I'm going to use it ugly and hard to maintain setups, it's normally because they've got really advanced, or they've got reporting requirements that are more advanced than the system's capabilities, and that's where you've got to find the balance. And then, of course, you need to test it. So build a test company and test your reporting and your use cases. Test your basic processes, work through it all. And if you need to change it, because there is something about evolving your reporting structure. If you change anything, in that reporting structure, you need to go back to the beginning, testing your originating use cases, working through your data entry processes, working through the maintenance, because you need to make sure that what you're doing is correct, because you very rarely get a chance to do this. You need to get it right. Okay. And then last but not least, you need to migrate and plan. And again, a lot of people think that changing their chart of account structure is simple and easy, or changing their data structure. It's not, right? It's very often you need to treat it almost like a new implementation of the system, because very often you have to start with a brand new company. You can't actually edit the existing data structures. So you need to think through things like, well, what is the data migration requirement that we have? How much data do we need to bring across? And my biggest tip here is to keep it as minimal as possible. You still have that old company for reference. So bring across only the level of data that you need to serve the reporting requirements. And wherever you can, try and avoid transactional based migration, because again, it can consume a huge amount of time. And very often the data that's produced isn't that useful, because you haven't recorded it to the level that you needed to in your previous data structure. So it can very often be incomplete as well, which is not great. And think about how and when you are going to transition over. It's really tempting, and I know a lot of people want to do it for their year end, but do think about whether that is the right time, because very often with year end there are other pressures around reporting, around you're on the back of a massive rush to hit numbers, etc. There's normally a budgeting period that you're going into, maybe an audit period. So sometimes, and it may even be a busy period for you as an organization. So you really don't want to be going through a lot of change management. It's lovely that it's clean, it's a nice clean cut off, but you're also going to have to go through a lot of change management. So picking a quarter end or a half year end can sometimes be better for your organization than trying to squeeze it into that already intensive year-end process. And so when you do this, right, once you've done your sort of basic assessments of your process, please do make sure that you train all of your system users on the new data structure and actually talk them through it, because the last thing you want is going live with this amazing new data structure, but nobody knows how to code, and so they just pick the one that they think. So thinking about how you're going to train and give them helpful cheat sheets during that first go live for where to code things to and what to populate. Maybe if there's not an enforcement capability, making sure that you're making sure that they are aware of the importance of filling out any new fields and how to populate them and what the format needs to be. And that they have gone through and entered a number of example transactions into that test company that you've built. So when you build it out, normally we suggest that you build the test structure, then you take a blank copy of it, and then they would then go through and test on a copy of the blank copy, if that makes any sense. So at least that way you get to understand, like when you go live, what's that data can look like. Because again, that can help identify any settings that have been missed, maybe some logic that needs to be implemented, maybe some validation. And of course, you need to think about how you're going to monitor data entry in the first 30 to 90 days, because that's normally when most of the mistakes are happening, because people are in that sort of learning period. So anything you can do to make that better. So making sure, as I said, you've given them some sort of cheat sheets for where to code things to, but also that you're pulling like weekly reports to identify mispostings or miscodings, and that you're keeping a real close eye on how things are going to make sure that the reporting's going in the right direction, because it's easier to do small corrections at the beginning than it is to do a massive data correction at the end of the month. So, and then of course we've talked about picking the right time to migrate. So just be aware of the pressures on your team, and as lovely as it is to do it at a year end, because we all feel like it's a lot cleaner and a lot easier, sometimes it's not always the best option. So thinking that through is really important. So I've kind of so if I just summarize what we've talked about really focusing on data requirements, and making sure we're holding workshops with all the different stakeholders, that we're understanding exactly what we need out of the system. And we're also making sure that we understand what's working well right now. We're not losing anything as we go through to the next phase. We're then going to do a full assessment of our existing systems. We're going to understand how far we can push it, what capabilities our current system has, and what tools can we use to deliver this brilliant new reporting structure, so we know how far we can push it, but also any dependencies that we need in order to make our new data structure work. We're then going to go through and test the bejesus out of it. So we're going to go through and make sure that we really understand that this is going to work not only for our reporting requirements, but also from a process perspective, and from a data maintenance perspective, so that as our organization grows and changes, that this structure can adapt and change with us. And then we're going to really plan out that data migration. We're going to think through and treat it like a real project when we make this transition. We're going to make sure that we've understood any change management requirements, that we've effectively trained our users, and we're going to roll it out at a time that works for the business. Sounds easy when I say it like that, hey? But it is easy, but you have to go through these steps. And it's very often where one of these steps has been missed that I've seen that the data structures aren't optimal for the organization. So again, save yourself the hassle of having to go back and do this, and follow this step by step through when you need to do it. Okay, well, I hope you have enjoyed this session. And I know it's been a very practical session, but I did promise some of my listeners that I would dip into the true consultancy stuff that I do on a day-to-day basis and share that knowledge. So, and I will continue to do so. And I would love any feedback. If there's any topics that you would like me to cover and extra feedback you would like to give me, then please do let me know. The next session on request, so thank you very much for that suggestion, is to actually go through a practical example of how to calculate the financial benefit of your new transformation project. So I've actually built out a number of templates that I'm just currently training our team on to help new customers or existing customers evaluate different projects, understand the ROI. And so I'm going to be talking you through an example of how one of those works on the next session. So I'm very excited to do this session, and that one is going to be held in, I'm thinking out loud here, it's going to be held in July. I've lost track of the months, guys, so it's going to be held in July. If you've got any particular things that you'd like out of that session, please do reach out. I'm happy to take sort of advanced questions and items to cover, because I always love a good suggestion. So in today's session, we've covered the components of strong financial data design, common risks, mistakes and risks, how to ensure it's the right financial structure, tips for migration to the new structure, and of course, any questions you have. So again, just a reminder for those of you that are listening to this on demand, please don't feel that you've missed your opportunity to ask questions. You absolutely can. And in fact, I promise I will make sure that I either come back to you or publicize any questions that you have for me and get back to you on those. So in terms of useful content, so the first thing is that if you haven't watched my system strategy session that I did a while back, that would be actually a really good point to think about, because it covers some of the elements we talked about today, things like the reporting layer. So I can definitely recommend that. Sage database guide. So I have one for 200. I do need to do an update on it, and I'm working on them for 50 and intact. If you are using Sage and would like to get access to that 200 one, or put on the wait list for the other ones, then please let me know. And for those of you that are using Sage Intacct or considering using Sage Intacct, we actually have a reporting tools webinar that you might find useful to get some insights on how the system can actually get you that data out and what capabilities it has. So again, starting that dig into system capabilities. Brilliant. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much for joining me on today's webinar, and I'll see you soon and next time on Financial Transformation Live.